Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where every day we take an element of technology that might be incredibly exciting but equally complex, and attempt to simplify it enough and put it in a language that everybody understands to try and help business leaders understand what these tech trends will mean to the future of their business and why they need to be thinking about it today. So today I want to tackle the world of quantum computing, and after learning more about how Quantinuum was formed from the merger of Honeywell Quantum Solutions and Cambridge Quantum, I felt incredibly intrigued and excited in equal measure. So today I've invited Ilyas Khan, CEO of Quantinuum, on the podcast to talk about the state of quantum computing industry overall, and also where Quantinuum will fit in all of this. But as you can imagine, it is a big topic with some high-value anecdotes thrown in for good measure. So without further ado, it's time for me to ask you to buckle up and hold on tight, because wherever you're listening in the world, I'm going to beam your ears all the way to the UK so you can join our conversation today. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Hi, well, my name's Ilyas Khan, and I'm the founder of Cambridge Quantum and currently the CEO of Quantinuum. And Quantinuum is the name of the business that has emanated after the merger of Cambridge Quantum with Honeywell Quantum Solutions in the United States. So the merged entity, which also happens to be the largest of the integrated quantum computing companies, is effectively a dual national sort of citizen of the United States and the United Kingdom.
Awesome. And it's such an exciting space to be in now. And I'm really interested in diving a little bit deeper into that with you in a moment. But before we do, a question I've got to ask, I want to take you back in time before the days of quantum computing. How did you get here? What's your origin story? And what was the passion for tech? What caused that in you and what lit the spark?
Well, depends how far you want to go into the dim, distant history. No, I will be looking forward to celebrating my 60th later on this year. So in my case, I'm one of those guests where the dim, distant past really is the dim, distant past. As you can probably tell from my accent, I'm originally from Lancashire. And about 14 or 15 years ago now, in 2008, 2009, I was genuinely contemplating retirement from business and spending more time at Cambridge. And I went back and was intimately involved in setting up something called Accelerate Cambridge, which nowadays is a highly respected, extremely successful accelerator program for deep science in the Cambridge area. And Cambridge probably is the one university outside of the United States where this confluence of new business establishment, venture backing, angel investing, and everything that goes into making ideas a business reality on the tech side is successful. Obviously, in the United States, we're very used to Silicon Valley. We're very used to the cluster around Boston and Harvard, etc. But here in Europe and outside of the United States, they're few and far between. And Cambridge is probably the only thing that is credible, to be honest with you, on a long-term basis. But even there, we were worried about deep science. And Accelerate Cambridge became a reality. And I also, at about that time, Neil, got involved because I became chairman of the Stephen Hawking Foundation, the inaugural chairman, and I got to know Stephen very well. Yeah. I became involved with looking at things from a slightly broader perspective, a very, very exciting perspective. And the specific origin story for Cambridge Quantum is that it was something that Stephen said to me in late 2013 that made me think more carefully about setting up an actual business rather than just scientific research. And like many things, that journey then subsequently took on its own form and energy. You know, as Goethe famously said, energy actions beget actions. And that's exactly what happened. So 2014, we eventually set up the business.
Wow, what an amazing story. And it must have inspired you as well, being surrounded by someone like the brilliant mind of Stephen Hawking there, right?
Well, there's really not much that you can say that would ever overstate the facts. And I've got used over the years to trying to think about this. And the one thing I would say is that, you look at the full sweep of humanity. I mean, how many of us have there ever been? I don't know, 10 billion maybe? I mean, there's 8 of us right now. So 10 billion, I don't know how many people there have been overall. But if we take that as a point of reference, the next question is, how many people will we remember in another 1,000 years' time or 2,000 years' time? So we might remember Beethoven, we might remember Archimedes, of course, we'll remember Einstein and Newton, and we might remember some fantastic novelists and maybe some artists. But there's not many. You run out of people if you've got a collection of 100 odd people and said, who will we remember in 1,000 or 2,000 years' time? There's not that many. But Stephen's one of them. And he not only had a mind the size of a planet, but he was never restricted by a lack of ambition. And that inspired me. I can say without hesitation that Stephen's the single most impressive human being I've ever met.
Wow, absolutely incredible. And of course, it was that path and that inspiration that led you to Quantinuum, which was formed, as you said a few moments ago, from the merger of Honeywell Quantum and Cambridge Quantum. But can you share the story behind that? Because there's got to be a story there too, right?
Yeah, well, we're probably still only on chapter, the preface to chapter 1 of the book that's yet to be written. And the reason, actually, in all seriousness, the reason I say that is I do truly think that in 10 or 20 years' time, some of the largest companies in the world will in fact be quantum computing companies. Yeah. And history also tells us that the early leaders have as good a chance, if not better, of being the eventual winners. And we only need to look at companies such as Google and Microsoft and Apple to know how true that is. The specific sort of encounter, as it were, that led eventually to the merger happened around about 2017, 2018, when I was introduced to Honeywell Quantum. We'd already, as you know, been set up as Cambridge Quantum and had very quickly developed a reputation as the leader in quantum software. And Honeywell eventually then became a collaborator. They became a client. We became a client of theirs. They then invested in Cambridge Quantum in 2019. And in fact, the 2019 investment by Honeywell made them our, I think, joint equal largest investor in the company at the time. We have avoided venture capital and financial investors. We were pretty much financed by our clients and our partners and our business partners, and also a very, very good set of friends of mine who had got me going together with my capital. So Honeywell as an investor then got to know us very well. And it was in early 2021, in February 2021, when I got a phone call from the chairman of Honeywell, a chap by the name of Darius Adamczyk, who's now actually the non-executive chairman of Quantinuum. I'm the CEO. And Darius said to me, look, Ilyas, what about our two businesses get together? Honeywell, of course, is a huge organization, and Honeywell Quantum was a division of Honeywell. So it was February 2021 when Darius raised the subject, and then we announced the merger publicly, I think in July of 2021. We needed regulatory approvals, which finally came through, and we announced the completion in December 2021.
And I'm quite conscious that quantum computing, the topic can divide audiences, and some say that it's possibly overhyped, and that is probably more to do with certain news articles that overhype the capabilities built on future promises. So just to set the scene once and for all, before we get too excited about the future and where we're going, can you tell me a little bit more about where quantum computing is right now?
Yeah, well, first of all, just on that topic, I mean, it's ironic on the day that you and I are chatting, there's actually yet another article that talks about hype. And I think what's hyped is a number of articles that talk about hype. And, there are lots of academics. They invariably are written by people who are in the academic side. And of course, they have an opinion about the way in which things are articulated. My perspective, and look, I've been around for as long as anybody's been around in quantum, sometimes called the granddad of quantum, computing on the commercial side, not on the innovation side. I think Feynman and people who are incredibly talented and who continue to be talented will drive this industry forward. But from a purely commercial standpoint, I think I was one of the first to get involved. And my perspective is relatively straightforward. I look at all the people who actually pay money for services. These are large global organizations. And these people are as well educated about quantum as it is possible to be. There is zero chance of any one of these clients entering into a commercial arrangement without a grounded, realistic understanding of where we are. People like Roche, people like Total, we're active in pharmaceuticals and drug discovery and carbon sequestration and logistical and financial applications. And in each case, our counterpart, our client, our partner is as well educated as it is possible to be in any technology that they adopt and pay for. And that gives me immense confidence. I also am not aware of anybody that I've come across, Neil, that suggests seriously that any solution is forthcoming from a quantum computer for a problem that cannot easily be solved with a classical computer, either this year or next year or the year after. Now, opinions begin to divide when you get to 4, 5, 6, 7 years down the road. There are some people think that there will be some problems that are solved, and there are others that don't. And we actually do something today that cannot be done on a classical computer. We generate as perfect a set of entropy, randomness, that it is possible to do using any tools, and we use a quantum computer. And that is an actual application. We use that for seeding cybersecurity keys. Now, that's not hype. That's a reality. It's not going to change the world, Neil. Nobody in 15 years' time is going to get excited by that. But it's a practical reality. And I think the stuff that we should get excited about, material discovery, for example, trying to solve NP problems, NP hard problems better than we otherwise could. I'm not saying solve them entirely, but things like traveling salesmen maybe make them more effective and more efficient, and Monte Carlo simulations. I think those things are realistically achievable in a time frame that now begins to matter. So if you are a large organization, you care about the fact that in 3 or 5 or 7 or 10 years' time, your business will be impacted. So I think that is really the key. And as far as hype is concerned, the next time somebody wants to raise money and, they're hyping their effectiveness, well, they can join the queue of a long line of people who've been doing it for 500 bloody years, whether it's tulips or whether it was semiconductors or cars or snake oil. And that's, a factor of society. But I don't think that actually matters when it comes to real people making real decisions.
Wow, what a great answer, and so refreshing to hear that as well. And I'm curious then, where does Quantinuum fit in the quantum computing landscape at the moment for anybody listening in the industry?
Oh, well, I'll be accused of hype now because we're the biggest company and the biggest integrated company and the leader. Yeah. But so I'll probably get my inbox full of people saying you're hyped it. Look, I think a better answer is that we're in the early stages of developing an ecosystem, and we are integrated. We have activities that range from the design and the planning of our hardware and the supply chain that then emanates to allow us to build hardware, the hardware itself, and a roadmap that tells us where that hardware is going over the next few years. And then on top of that, we've chosen not to join the mad dash to sell these things in the market, There are many quantum computing companies that will, in fact, jump up and down and tell you how marvelously easy it is to access their computer on the cloud. The fact of the matter is, we wish them all the best, but of course, you're not going to solve any problems at the moment. They are merely experimental, so we're not in that game. And we cheer everybody on, and we want them to succeed. But we're platform neutral. We don't care about the underlying technologies. But our own device is a trapped ion device that we're very comfortable with, and we use that, and we're building on top of that, Neil, a whole middleware stack, everything from optimization to compiling and ultimately multitasking in the context of what you might imagine an operating system will in the future do. It's not an operating system today. So we're involved in that activity. And even just by saying what I've said, the full scope of what we do is probably as great or if not greater than anything that's being done by anybody else. But then on top of that, we cover the spectrum on the application side. We have research and early product development in quantum chemistry, in quantum machine learning, in quantum AI, in natural language processing, which of course is the heart of AI, and on cybersecurity. And that really are all the things that anybody who thinks about quantum computing will think about when they say, oh, this is the area in which we want to be active. So in our case, we are active in all of them, and we have, if not the largest, then one of the largest teams in each of those areas. In total, I think we're at about 450 people right now, which I think, of course, is in fact the biggest team. I suspect it's also bigger than the internal teams at places like Google and Microsoft and at IBM, etc. But of course, it is very, very early days.
And I'm quite conscious there'll be a lot of people listening all over the world and trying to work out how this might work in their world and in their industry. So just to bring to life some of what you're talking about here, do you have any use cases around the kind of problems that you're solving for businesses right now?
Well, I'd have to. It would be remiss of me to answer that question without saying the damn well obvious, which is every technology revolution that we have lived through since the late 18th century, when the spinning jenny was first invented, has led to, rightly so, the question that you have asked. And if in every single case, I think we have grossly underestimated what the technology can be used for because we simply don't know. Yeah. So, the famous example of, I think, the chairman of, I'll probably get this wrong now, but AT&T or somebody, when told about underwater cables for telegraphs, was like, well, what am I going to use that for? And, the same with the original combustion engine. And we all know about what happened when, steam engines came along. And of course, more recently, I remember scratching my head and thinking, what the hell am I going to do with this big brick in the early 90s when mobile telephony came along and the internet, etc. So it is very clear that neither you nor I nor anybody else knows what the eventual uses will be, because it is only when quantum computers proliferate that smart people will find ways of really getting incredible usage. So what do we know? What we do know and what we can anticipate with confidence is that a quantum computer operates on a very different set of logic and therefore shifts the boundaries of what possibly is tractable or intractable. I don't want to say faster or slower, because that's not really accurate. If something's going to take you 100 years to do, well, effectively, you can't do it. And if a quantum computer could do that in either seconds or minutes or hours or days, it means a problem that was previously unsolvable becomes solvable. And the areas that align with that expectation, because of what we do know at this stage, are the obvious ones. Feynman spoke about simulating quantum systems using a quantum system. And that is really where you start thinking about material discovery, whether it's pharmaceuticals, whether it's something for nitrogen fixation, whether it's something for all kinds of uses. It could be new steel alloys for use in space. It could be some sort of way in which we can think about solving some problems for, drug delivery, not just drug discovery. So that whole area is going to have such an impact that I think it will make all other technology revolutions look like mere disruptions. And then that's without speaking about the impact on AI. The more we've looked into this and the more we can exploit something called Hilbert space, the easier it becomes to think of AI as somehow coming of age. The stuff we have at the moment is expensive and opaque. And I think in that context, language processing lends itself to fantastic discovery, and we're very excited by that. And then you get to the stuff that people talk about with less conviction and more hope, and that is in the context of machine learning or possibly solving problems that are, for example, designated as traveling salesmen or logistics or Monte Carlo simulations. So those are the areas. Now, the use cases, of course, depending upon what industry you're in, are immediately obvious. If you're the chairman of DHL or if you're running ExxonMobil, you know that quantum will impact you and you better be ready. And that is where we are in the cycle at the moment. Large organizations have realized that in their context, 5 years is not very long at all.
And it isn't very long at all. And I know you've not got a virtual crystal ball there, but are there any mouth-watering prospects that particularly excite you about the future and the potential game-changing use cases? I know none of us know, but I'm curious if there is anything that, does.
The fact that none of us know doesn't mean that we can't apply ourselves to this thought process. I think I'm excited in the very short term by the fact that we do now look as if we can generate some cybersecurity keys on a repeatable, consistent basis where the underlying key itself is literally unhackable. It cannot be hacked because it's not deterministic. It's not the result of an algorithm. And that has many implications. And I think that that's something that is a beneficial use of quantum computers that will start to become more and more commonly accepted. And the reason for that is that the keys will be and can be classical. So RSA keys or AES keys, all the stuff we use day in, day out, one-time pads, all these things that rely upon patternless or as close as you can get. And remember, cybersecurity is all just about randomness. All these complex algorithms are just a way of jumbling up information so that somebody who's an adversary can't get at it. So I think that's, in the short term, something that is now likely to happen. The short term means this year and next. And then I would have to say that it's a toss-up thereafter. And the application of what we might call these early stage, we refer to them as NISC era machines, as they get bigger and better and with higher fidelities, it is entirely possible that a problem, which is computationally provably complex and hard using classical computers, might become easy with, or not might, but will become easy. And applying that to maybe logistics or machine learning, I think those areas do become very exciting. And then very shortly thereafter, so are we talking 5 years, are we talking 10? I'm not sure. I think that that's where we are starting to think about material discovery, getting more and more excited, not because a quantum computer on its own will do it, but a smart combination of using the best of classical resources with quantum resources in a few years' time is where I think there's a lot of excitement.
And speaking of excitement, on the merger of Honeywell Quantum with the hardware and Cambridge Quantum with the software, what excites you about that merger and the possibilities that could open up to?
Oh, gosh. I had a new joiners meeting this morning, and 20 people that were coming on and telling me what they're up to. And I looked at that sort of list and I spoke to the people. And each time I look at this, we're so blessed to have some of the most interesting people in the world working on problems that matter. I think it's the scale, I would have to say. When you do these things, you're looking at scale. So I think that we can start to address some of these problems with the scale that we've got. That's what I'm really excited by. And as the founder of one of the companies previously, I can tell you that you can have all the aspirations that you want. But unless you can scale them, unless you can deliver them safely to large enterprises, you're really not going to get very far. You're just going to wave your arms around. And what I like is that bridge that's been built between aspiration and actual delivery.
Love that. And I appreciate you probably can't share too much right now, but is there anything you can share about what your big focus is going to be this year, or maybe leave us with a couple of teasers?
Oh, no. Look, none of this is top secret. I mean, we speak to people all the time. Well, I mean, we're not a listed company or anything. So we, on the one hand can benefit from that. And on the other, we're a little bit less easy to decipher. But, we've made it very clear. We are entirely integrated in our business. Each one of the things that we do is critically important to the other. And I sometimes listen to these younger companies that are getting very breathless about what they do. And I think to myself, well, hang on a minute. The success that you require means that many other bits have to come together as well. And, I'm reminded, we use the example of mobile telephony, but if you remember in 1987 and 1988, when the first mobile phones made their appearance, you and I would not have paid money unless somebody somewhere was making the keypad, somebody somewhere was making the transmission towers, somebody somewhere was able to have a distribution network to sell these subscriptions, et cetera, et cetera. It's a whole integration that matters. So we've decided that we are the integrated company. In fact, we've been described as the Apple of quantum computing, which is obviously very flattering. But it's a description that I think does fit. I think we are the leaders in our space, and we are covering the waterfront. And we are therefore equally excited about the hardware development roadmap, the control systems, the middleware, the compilers, the web-based access, and then all of the applications I've mentioned, from quantum chemistry to machine learning, all the way through to cybersecurity and AI. We just, by the way, today we've announced something which is very important. I mean, we were the originators of Ticket, TKET, which is a software development tool. And it's got literally hundreds of thousands of people all over the world using Ticket. It's an open source resource. If you and I had been speaking even 2 years ago, and I said, well, one of our dreams would be that our software development tool would be the leader in the world with hundreds of thousands of users, people would have said, you're mad. I would have said, I'm mad. But it's a reality. And that is the underpinning which allows me to make the statements that I've made earlier.
Inspirational stuff, and a real key message there about thinking bigger and daring to think bigger. And before I let you go, though, we've come full circle now. We started with your origin story, and I always finish by asking my guests to leave everyone listening with a personal touch of inspiration by sharing maybe a book that has inspired them, or a song that they helps them get their head in the zone, or just very important to them. What are you going to leave us with today, and is there a story to accompany your choice?
Yes, thank you for asking that question. And as always, you're spoiled for choice. There are so many things, but I guess there are two things that I'd like to leave you with. One is the very well-known saying of Stephen Hawking, don't look down at your feet, look up at the stars. And, if anything, quantum inspires that thought, because regardless of the business outcomes, a quantum computer might allow us to touch and understand and discover the nature of reality itself. So I'm always inspired by Stephen's commentary there. He was somebody who battled adversity all his life, all his adult life, and he was always looking up. And that's something which I think is terribly important. And I guess the other inspiration, which is maybe a little bit more practical, possibly slightly more controversial, when I was a young gun, I discovered Clausewitz, Carl von Clausewitz, and he wrote this book called On War, which is typically seen as a military manual. And it is, and it's a very deep book, and it's a very interesting book. But there are a number of things that are in there that lend themselves to practical application, just by way of reminder. And there could be many, many other things that have come through. But, I always think of what we're doing as tempered by this sort of battle against, nature, if you like. There are so many things that could possibly go wrong. But at the end of the day, as long as you are prepared, to take the fullness of what he used to call the Trinity, you'll be well served. And you just have to remember that it's a composition of all these things that comes together. It's rarely one thing that matters. So I guess those are my two things. Clausewitz and Hawking.
Wow, that will take some beating. A great moment to end the show on. But before I do let you go, for anyone listening, just want to find out more information about anything we talked about today, or your work, where you're going, and maybe even contact your team if they've got any questions. What's the best starting point for everything?
Oh, the website, of course, Quantinuum.com, Quantiw, so W, not W, UUM, Quantinuum is by far the best thing. I'm not that big on, personally, that big on social media. So there's LinkedIn that I typically would use as my go-to choice personally. But the company, Quantinuum, and of course, Cambridge Quantum, are very active on Twitter, and people can follow us there. We're pretty good at making sure that updates are out in the public domain. We've got 2 or 3 just out today, and each week we'll have quite a lot coming on. As an educational resource, I would say that excluding what we do at Quantinuum, I have to pay tribute to the quantum websites of IBM and of Microsoft. Both of those websites, there's a lot of resource there for people who are maybe just getting started on the journey.
Fantastic. Well, I cannot thank you enough for coming on the podcast today, sharing your story, and also discussing the state of quantum computing, busting a few myths along the way, and also Quantinuum's place in it all, and leaving us with 2 great books too, and a moment of inspiration. So thank you so much for taking the time to sit down and share that with me today.
You're welcome. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for listening.
Wow, I was just hanging on his every word there. So much gold in that conversation, from his origin story, being inspired by Stephen Hawking, and building the future of quantum computing. Feels like the only limit here is our imagination, doesn't it? But I'd love to hear your thoughts about the state of quantum computing, where we are now, where we're heading, exploring the art of the possible together. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. So please email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. My website is techblogwriter.co.uk, and you can also DM me on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram @Neil C. Hughes. But that's it for today. We've covered so much, and it's one of those stories that I'll remember for a long time. So a big thank you to today's guest for sharing his story, and also to each and every one of you for listening to the podcast. But until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.